I'm Heather Stone from the FDA. I'm an infectious disease epidemiologist and work in health policy. And delighted to be presenting today about the CURE ID platform, which is an FDA and NCATS NIH, the National Centers for Advancing Translational Sciences at the National Institutes of Health, collaboration, and then the role of the public-private partnership that we've developed with great support from Natalie and others called the CURE Drug Repurposing Collaboratory. And building off of Natalie's presentation, again with this theme of how have COVID and NTDs interacted with each other in the space of drug repurposing, both helping and perhaps hindering one another. So just a few disclaimers. I represent the FDA, but I will also be talking about the public-private partnership, and there will be significant discussion of unapproved uses or off-label uses of the drugs. So the first question is, what is drug repurposing? And you can define it in many different ways, but for the context of this conversation, I would define it as the identification of potential novel uses of existing drugs. It's our belief that for diseases lacking adequate approved treatments, clinical experience of how clinicians are using these drugs in the field, as it were, could be collected and used to identify promising candidates, drug combinations, treatment regimens, et cetera, in a much more rapid way that could then be used to inform clinical trials. This could include new indications or new ways of treating diseases, but also, as I said, new combinations, dosing regimens or durations of therapy, new populations, and importantly, unapproved uses that do not work or even harm patients. So this is not only identifying positive instances of drug repurposing, but also instances that have tried and failed. So in 2012 and 2013, FDA and NCATS got together and established CURE ID, which was a platform for collecting case reports from clinicians, as well as a discussion forum and mechanism for sharing journal articles, news articles, events, etc. The goal of this platform was to enhance the understanding of new uses of approved medical products, to facilitate clinical trials and drug development, and ultimately to serve as a resource for physicians to share information where no FDA-approved product, which had been proven to be safe and effective, already existed for the new use. Please feel free to visit CURE ID. It's available at cure.ncats.io on the web, or you can download the mobile app, CURE Space ID, in the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. And it's freely available. So there are a number of ways that, or a number of specific areas that one can imagine repurposing having particular advantages in, and a platform of this nature, including neglected tropical or infectious diseases, but also antimicrobial resistant organisms, as well as emerging threats. And so we identified a list of initial priority diseases, including COVID, but also atypical or non-tuberculous mycobacteria, drug-resistant gonorrhea, mycetoma, rare and resistant fungal infections, and multi-drug resistant gram-negative bacteria. And then in the NTD space, more specifically, also questions about toxoplasmosis in pregnancy, leishmaniasis, Buruli ulcer, babesiosis, and dengue and viral hemorrhagic fevers. The platform works by having clinicians or other healthcare providers submit a very easy, rapid case report. It takes 3 to 10 minutes to enter via the app or website with completely de-identified data, so no patient identifiable information, and using largely standardized terminology. Once the case is posted, it's rapidly reviewed by clinician moderators, typically within 12 hours, often much less than that. And the moderators that have the option to contact the user for additional details or clarification, or in a very rare instance where the report is needs to be removed to do so. The data from the case reports is then aggregated to show the total number of cases using each drug alone or in the specific combinations of drugs that it may have used, and then can be further broken down by treatment outcome to try to help users have a sense of which drugs look the most promising or the least promising and how they compare. And then users can also download the entire de-identified data set to conduct their own research. We believe CURE can serve as a rapid communication platform for healthcare providers during an outbreak, providing for systematic case sharing, discussions, and sharing of the latest literature. It can facilitate sharing of information on the use of potential therapies for diseases which lack adequate approved treatments, and inform current and future clinical trials, serving as an important sort of bridging step between unstructured anecdotal reports and the robust randomized trials ultimately required for drug approval and strong evidence generation. Importantly, I think this enables the exchange of opinions from global communities of experts and helps break down some of the geographic silos that exist. And our hope is that it can help to identify potential new uses for existing drugs while limiting unhelpful or harmful uses. To date, we have included 325 different infectious diseases in the CureID platform, about 2,700 case reports, nearly 7,000 activated users, and more than 20,000 clinical trials. For COVID specifically, we have 1,100 case reports, which are a combination of those from that clinicians have submitted, as well as those in the published literature that our team has extracted. More than 100 discussion posts, 1,400 clinical trials, and 1,300 journal articles are amongst the information that's been shared. In total, 290 repurposed drugs have been identified in the CureID COVID case collection, and 45 of those drugs have 10 or more cases. And I'd like to specifically thank Dr. David Feigenbaum's Corona team at the University of Pennsylvania and the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network, which has been, as well as our fellows and interns who have gone to extraordinary lengths to identify these cases and enter them from the published literature. However, it's important to acknowledge that there are major limitations to this data, and in particular, the relatively low number of clinician submitted reports and those in the published literature, when coupled with the high spontaneous recovery rate in COVID-19 and differences in severity of infection, it makes the data difficult, if not impossible, to interpret. So our solution was based on how can we get a much larger number of cases such that we would have more power to detect possible differences. And that seemed to require inclusion of a method that didn't require clinician entry. And so our proposal was to get that from electronic health records and other existing registries to sort of pull many different data streams together. Because the data we collect is relatively limited, it becomes possible to aggregate across many different streams of information. So we proposed an idea to build an automated extraction tool that would pull de-identified data directly from electronic health records and various registries into the CureID platform. We created a partnership between FDA, NCATS, and the Critical Path Institute, which houses our CURE Drug Repurposing Collaboratory, as well as 4 primary institutional partners, Johns Hopkins, Emory, and University of California Health Systems, and the Society of Critical Care Medicine's Virus Registry. With this proposal, high-level case reports translated from EHR and registries to the CureID case report form at the institutional site with completely de-identified patient-level data would then be made openly accessible for use and download via the CureID platform in a way that it currently is not even in many of the systems that do try to pull EHR data together. Sites that use a common data model would be funneled through the N3C collaboration at NCATS, where they have a mechanism for pulling that data together already. But importantly, sites that don't use a common data model, which is the vast majority, would use an edge tool developed by Hopkins that would sort of serve as a translation between a non-data model electronic health record system and the CureID case report form. And they would do that through the Society of Critical Care Medicine's virus registry. So the goal of this EHR data extraction would be to share data, making a limited high-value set of case data on drug treatments for COVID-19 openly available to all individuals. To work with Hopkins to develop this automated data extraction tool, which could then be shared openly and used for other purposes, and to provide this technology to further adoption by the SCCM virus sites to reduce the burden of case sharing. Those participating in that registry currently spend on the order of an hour and a half per case report entering the data. So you can only, and they have something like 65,000 cases at this point. So you can only imagine the burden of on healthcare workers to enter that information. And then ultimately, thinking ahead to facilitate the development of a sustainable infrastructure that would enable clinical care and clinical research to be more seamlessly integrated. So where we are now is that we have a working group of SCCM Mayo virus experts, as well as leading clinicians from Hopkins, Emory, and UCSF that have been adapting our CURE ID case report form for COVID for EHR registry data extraction, which enables us to get a lot more data than when we were asking for it from clinicians. Extending the partnership to include other health systems and registries, and then including an international component in partnership with the Infectious Disease Data Observatory at Oxford. This is just the structure of the CURE Drug Repurposing Collaboratory Coordinating Center, Partnership Coordinating Center. So you can see the main institutional partners, the PIPs as we call them, primary institutional partners, and then the large number of secondary institutional partners, all told being about 300 sites. So our hope is that within the next just probably 3 to 6 months, we will have included 100,000 patients de-identified data as case reports and made that openly available on the CURE ID platform in partnership with our partners. And within 2 years, which is a grant period that we've been proposing, we estimate to include 250,000 patients. And as I said, really looking to develop this as a sustainable infrastructure for capturing and sharing information, both through these registries as well as through this open source edge tool. This all is reliant upon a public-private partnership that enables us to work with stakeholders across a wide swath of organizations. And importantly, is really focused on how we move from anecdotal observational case collection, which is important but has limitations, to evidence generation and dissemination. So in June of 2020, the Critical Path Institute convened a public-private partnership in collaboration with FDA and NCATS and the CURE ID platform called the CURE Drug Repurposing Collaboratory. It has begun with a pilot focused on drug repurposing for COVID-19 and is also pursuing repurposing opportunities for several of the neglected tropical diseases and other infectious diseases in the previous slides. And our goal is to build infrastructure that could be used for COVID-19, but also could be expanded to other neglected infectious diseases in the future. And to really demonstrate how data shared from clinicians in real time can be used to inform future and ongoing clinical trials, and based on those trial results, potentially drug labeling or other regulatory decision-making. And this is an active group that is seeking partnership both from individuals and institutions. So I encourage you to reach out today, and there's contact information in a later slide. And these slides will be made available. Oops, wrong button. I won't go into depth, but just to show you the structure of the CURE Drug Repurposing Collaboratory, which includes an advisory committee that oversees a broad range of activities across drug repurposing in many different spaces, including infectious diseases, and now we're expanding into rare diseases, special populations, including pregnant women and neonates, and then some of the operational working groups, such as preclinical to clinical translation, clinical trial implementation and infrastructure building, and regulatory and legislative and policy. So just as a final thought, I think there is an opportunity to build infrastructure for COVID-19 that can be used for NTDs and other neglected diseases, and we need to take advantage of that opportunity. But I think COVID has also very clearly demonstrated to the world the need for collecting anecdotal and observational data, but for the purposes of generating hypotheses, not for the purposes of generating confirmatory evidence. And that observational data then needs to be rapidly and systematically translated into randomized clinical trials, and that these efforts need to be coordinated through groups like the CURE Drug Repurposing Collaboratory, as well as other public-private partnerships and institutions. So I encourage you to get involved in the CURE Drug Repurposing Collaboratory and or the CURE ID platform. Please feel free to reach out, and would like to thank our many partners for their support and participation, and our extensive CURE ID team and CDRC team, which luckily seems to be growing on a daily basis. So thank you so much.